Sorry, when you have to share your slides because there are all these kinds of platforms, and nowadays I use platforms all over the world, and there are some of them I have not even heard about, and I don't know how to do sharing the screen, and I'm always excited whether I can do that or not, because definitely, if I cannot sleep my slides, I'm in trouble. But Zoom usually works all right, so there's no problem with that. Okay, let me start with a quote, one of my favorite quotes. I think I may have mentioned that to you, but I'm gonna return to that. You probably all know Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass. This is a very famous book. Probably most of you have read that. If you haven't read that, I recommend that you do that. And there is a figure in that book called Humpty Dumpty. So there are funny figures in the whole book, and one of them is Humpty Dumpty. And Humpty Dumpty says something very important, I think, from the perspective of the topic that we want to address today. Humpty Dumpty says, when I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more or less. What does that mean? How do you understand this statement? So when I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more or less. How can it be? Because, you have always heard about the fact that basically a word means something only in a particular context, and it can be interpreted in a particular way or whatever, depending on what context the word is used. And as teachers, you have always been told that if you teach vocabulary, you have to teach vocabulary in context. So how is it possible that Humpty Dumpty speaks about that? Do you believe Humpty Dumpty? So Humpty Dumpty says, when I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more or less. Basically, this means that, okay, whatever you think about what I said, I am the one who controls what I mean. So what is your opinion about this statement? Is it true? No opinion. Just think about the fact that, of course, we have a lot of words in a particular language, no matter whether this is English or German or French or Italian or whatever. And of course, we need these words because we want to communicate with other people. And we have to understand relatively similar things by those words. Otherwise, we don't understand each other. So these words are like labels, that mean similar things for speakers of a speech community. But of course, words most of the time can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. Just think about politics nowadays. If you think about or read about politics or listen to broadcast talk or other things, you may notice that people quarrel about what a particular word meant when someone pronounced that. Okay? So it's one thing what you as a speaker wants to do with the words, and it's another thing how people who listen to your talk will interpret a particular word. Okay? So these are two different things. Speakers and hearers may interpret the same thing in different ways. But there is one thing for sure where we can actually agree with Humpty Dumpty, that if you speak and if you put your thoughts into words, then you have a particular goal with that. You have a particular meaning to make with that. Okay? So after all, Humpty Dumpty is right when it says that when I use a word, it means just what I choose to mean and neither more or less. Because, there is a reason why I selected that particular word. And that's for sure that, I thought that in that particular situation, that particular word was the one that carried my meaning better than anything else. Okay, so this is what actually Humpty Dumpty speaks about. And this is the problem that we actually want to discuss today, that on the one hand, we have these words that mean relatively the same thing for speakers of a speech community, but at the same time, there is usually some kind of discrepancy between what a speaker says and what the hearers understand, because they are individuals who interpret the same label in different ways. So there is always a danger in communication that you might be misunderstood by the others who you talk to. Okay, so this is the issue that I want to discuss today. And there is another very important thing, that we already know that these words denote concepts. And of course, concepts are preverbal units, which means that units that we have not uttered yet. So there is a distinction between conceptualization, the intended message, and the verbal formulation, when we actually put the intended message into words. And of course, there should be some kind of mapping between the two sides, between the conceptual representation and the selected word. So for example, Stephen Green suggested that such a mapping might differ between languages, because languages differ in terms of how concepts are lexicalized. And here is our problem as far as bilingualism is concerned, because there is a concept, that concept may exist in many languages, but at the same time, that concept may be lexicalized in a different way. What does that mean? It means that the several aspects of this concept are highlighted by lexicalization in different languages. For example, in American English, we say vacation. Everybody knows what it means, and if we look at other languages, like, for example, Hungarian, what Hungarian highlights, the aspect that Hungarian highlights is freedom. So when you are on vacation, you are free to do things. So that's why the lexical item that denotes vacation in Hungarian highlights that particular aspect of the concept. Or in Russian, they say kanikuli, which refers to hot weather. Okay, so my point is that there is a concept that exists, of course, out there in the world, and the speakers of different languages try to lexicalize that concept. And they actually emphasize different aspects of that concept. So as you saw, Hungarian people refer to the freedom side of this, that when you are on vacation, you are free to do things. The Russians highlight the weather. So that is usually hot weather, when they are on vacation. So after all, the French vacation, they are like the Americans, they highlight the same thing. So after all, there is no one-to-one relationship in this matter as far as different languages are concerned. Let me ask you what you know about equivalents in other languages, like in Chinese. Yingru, what is the word in Chinese for vacation?
假期, or we use a verb form like 放假.
And what does that mean? What does that mean? What does yeah?
So 假 means holiday, vacation, and 放 actually is a verb, means you have that holiday.
Okay, so yeah. Basically it is something like a one-to-one relationship between the American version vacation and the Chinese word, because you also means something like vacation by that word. Yes, so there is nothing even or Russian or something like that. All right. How about Vietnamese, Dahan?
Yeah, I mean, like in Vietnamese is mean kỳ nghỉ. So I think it's probably not so different than the English meaning, and we just have one word to say it actually.
Yeah, maybe I just guess that in some of the Asian languages like Vietnamese, Korean, and Chinese, maybe it is something like a direct translation from English or
yes, and Professor, I'm also thinking is because in the history we that we were colonized by a lot of like big countries. So I think we at that time we didn't have the concept of vacation. Basically, like we work all the time, and because our culture is agricultural culture, so we don't have things like vacation. We just have holiday to celebrate the agriculture. So the concept of vacation is actually also borrowed by the Western culture. So that's why you say direct mapping makes sense there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right. I can imagine that's all right. How about Davindi? How about your language?
I actually agree with Han. I cannot think of an equivalent in my language because we directly use the word vacation, and like I have the concept of like enjoyment, freedom behind that word. Yes.
Okay. So this is a very interesting thing because after all, as you see, in some of the other languages, there is a different aspect of vacation emphasized and lexicalized. However, in those languages, as Han explained, that were actually under colonization or effect of the English language or something like that, the concept was directly taken over by the local language. So, there is nothing like highlighting a particular aspect of the concept there as it is in German, as it is in Russian, as it is in Hungarian, and so on. All right. So let's go to the next issue. And so what we have to emphasize is that basically the preverbal thought and the word in which we put the preverbal thought are two sides of one and the same thing, after all. So it's very interesting that when thought is being formed, there must be already an interaction between the chunks of message and the words it will be embedded in. So basically, when you speak, sometimes there is back and forth. You have your preverbal thought and you try several different kind of words to put these preverbal thoughts into. Okay, so it is not that there is a direct connection right away, but quite often there might be, of course, but most of the time there is this back and forth. And it's very interesting that Vygotsky, the world famous Russian psychologist, quotes Mandelstam. Mandelstam is a Jewish poet. Mandelstam said that I have forgotten the word I intended to say, and my thought unembedded returns to the realm of shadows. It's a beautiful utterance because what the poet wants to emphasize here is that he wanted to say something and found the right word for that, but after all, he forgot the word and he thinks that the idea also was forgotten because the word was lost. Okay, so the idea, the preverbal thought is embedded in a word, in an expression, okay? And that's the way how it comes out. Why is it important for us? Just think about the fact that one of the major problems of second language learners and second language users is to find a word in the target language to express what you have. So you have the thought, but you struggle with letting this thought out, embedding the thought, because you do not find the right word in the second language. you know? So that's a frustrational thing, because I think you have already been in situations where you had to use your second language and you had your thoughts, but you didn't know how to embody these thoughts, you know? So you didn't find the word, and you were struggling to kind of let your thoughts out because you didn't have the right words, you know? So that happens very, very often, because many times it's not that you cannot solve a task, it's not that you cannot say something, but the problem is the word selection, whether you actually can find the right word for the audience to put your idea into. Tell me, have you ever experienced something like that when you were supposed to use your second language and you were struggling and you were even anxious, or you were sometimes even angry not to be able to say what you wanted? Have you experienced something like that?
I think so. When I first started learning the language and when I didn't have enough vocabulary. And I mean, even now, like when I want to write something, I sometimes struggle to find the correct word.
Yeah. Yes. So it's not that you do not have the idea, it's the word, you know? That's the real problem, to embody the ideas, you know, that you already have. So this is where the danger of the second language is, that of course, you know, since you have limited vocabulary, limited access to those labels, to those words that people use in the second language, you know, you struggle with that, which makes your life sometimes miserable, because it's not that you cannot solve a particular problem, or you cannot have some contribution to a debate or something like that. The problem is whether you can find the words, you know, to express what you actually want. That's the major issue. So, you know, there is this connection. So, you know, we have the preverbal thought, and then the preverbal thought should be put into words. And then there comes the utterance. So you remember my chart earlier that we used, here it is. So we had the common underlying conceptual base, which is the conceptualizer, basically. So this is where the preverbal thought is. This is where the preverbal thought is formulated, after all. And then the next is the formulator. So you formulate your thoughts. What do? You put your thoughts into words, you know? And this is where, as a bilingual, you have to select the language channels. This is where your preverbal thoughts become linguistically embodied, you know? So that's where you come in with the right words, and then articulator, when you actually utter what you created linguistically here, you know? So the preverbal thought, and then the formulator, where you actually find the right words for your thoughts, and then you utter, you know, what you produce. But I want to emphasize that this seems to be like a linear production line, not necessary, because I mentioned that there is a back and forth between the conceptualizer and the formulator. So, you know, you want to say something, and then you stop and you go back and you use another word, and then you create a new utterance, and you decide, no, it's not good, let's go back, and then so on. So this is what speech is all about, back and forth between the conceptualizer and the formulator. So here is also a very important thing for language teachers, because earlier we thought that, you know, there are grammatical constructions. So basically what we do, we put words into the grammatical constructions. No, as you see, if we accept this kind of approach that I'm talking about, then basically you have the preverbal thought, and then you select words, and those words require structures. So when you put the words together into the articulator, you put them into a particular structure. So that creates a structure, you know. So if you just think about your experience with languages, you know, the major and most important thing is learning words, not learning grammatical structures, learning words, because you could have all the grammatical structures of a particular language. You cannot do anything with that without words. So you need the words. The first things that you have is to find the words, the right words. And when you have words, you know, you put them together somehow, okay? So that's a secondary thing, you know, because the syntactic structures that come after that, you know, the words require, of course, some kind of syntactic structure, but that's secondary. The first is to find the right word. And, you know, when there is this back and forth between the conceptualizer and the formulator, that is also when you try different kind of structures to put it, because, you know, if you select a different word, then different word may require another structure, you know. So after all, this is a very interesting, a very important kind of thing that goes on in our mind. And when we are bilingual, that process is even more problematic, you know, because we have two choices there, you know, two languages, and then both languages offer different kind of options as far as words are concerned, you know. So if you are an English Chinese speaker, you know, or you have your first language, of course, it's easier to find words in your first language, and you have your second language, you know, where, of course, you know, you have some restrictions as far as selecting the right word is concerned. So I want to kind of go back to Vygotsky, who described this process properly. And he talked about the fact that there is this continual movement back and forth from thought to word and from word to thought. Thought is not merely expressed in word. It comes into existence through them, you know? And that's the reason, of course, that there is no one-to-one relationship between the structure of the speech and the structure of thought. There is no 100% mapping between the two at all. There cannot be, okay? And as a result of the thought-word interaction, and then this back and forth, thought usually undergoes several changes as it returns into speech. Absolutely, we can agree with that, you know? And it is especially very clear when you write, for example, when you write an essay, and then, you know, you write a sentence, and then you are not satisfied with that, so you delete it and you start again and you write it again. Or, you know, when your paragraph is ready, then you go back and you read the paragraph and you say you don't like that, so you change the wording and so on. So after all, you know, this is always a back and forth. Here is an example, actually a couple of examples. Someone says the following: you should accompany. Well, you'd better come with me. So the person starts with the Latin word accompany. So you should accompany me. This is what the person wanted to say. And then goes back and says, oh, you'd better come with me. You know, so come with, that's the simplest way to say accompany somebody. So after all, you know, he found another word to express what he actually wants. You know, accompany is an elegant kind of Greco-Latin word to express basically come or go with somebody. Or here is another example. Mom was feeling a bit blue. You want to say that she was sad? Okay, so after all, in this conversation, you know, the first guy says blue referring to sadness. And then the second one wants to clarify what the other meant. So the other says, you want to say that she was sad, okay? So basically change the word which expressed better, much more clearer than blue, because blue is a polysemic word, you know? So it can mean several different things. And of course, the second person thought that, you know, the meaning of that word should be clarified. So he used a synonym in that particular context. And there is this very interesting thing that, of course, in human languages, we have limited number of words. We cannot have different words for every single sense that we have in the word. So that's why words are polysemic. Words have different senses, you know, and the question is in what sense they are used. And this is where context comes in. This is where context clarifies the sense of a particular word. One of my best examples is, I don't know how much you know about music, but there is a very fantastic piece of American music called Rhapsody in Blue. Rhapsody in Blue, you know, and this work was translated into several different languages, you know, and most of the translations are bad because Rhapsody in Blue, if you Google that, you will see that in blue means that it's a sad rhapsody. So the music is sadness. It expresses moodiness, sadness, and so on. And that's why the author of the music called that Rhapsody in Blue. But most of the cases in many languages, German, Hungarian, Lithuanian, and so on, they translated that as color. So the blue rhapsody, which is wrong because blue means sad, you know? So that is a typical mistake as far as translation is concerned. Why is it possible? Because, you know, the translator didn't pay attention to the actual mood that the music expressed. And the other thing is that the title was used without context. So the context did not specify in what sense the word blue was used, okay? So the point is that, you know, many times this polysemy that we have, the fact that particular words can refer to several different concepts and at the same time they can have different senses, you know, may lead to translation problems. So it is very important that we have to take the context into consideration. So this is something that I highlighted here on this screen. So please read it very carefully. It means that it is the knowledge of the English language that supplies the word meaning, possible senses of a word, and it is the knowledge of the word that supplies the sense of the word in the given context. So these are two very important things that act at the same time, you know? So you know the English language, and within the English language, that particular word means something. And it's another thing, you know, what the context actually specifies when you use it in an utterance or in a sentence. Here are some examples. While driving home, Mr. Brown hit a cat on the road. This is one sense of hit. And in the second one, we must hit the road soon if we don't want to be late for the wedding. So the same word, hit, is used in both sentences, but in two different senses. How do we know that in two different senses? Because of the context. So the context specifies that. So it's hit a cat, you know, it can have only one particular meaning in that context. And hit the road, it is a metaphorical sense of the word. So these different senses of one and the same word, after all, two different senses of one and the same word. So basically the role of context is to specify the sense of a word, you know. So after all, Vygotsky also writes, he was an excellent psychologist, because he talks about the fact that a word in context means both more or less than the same word without context. It means more because the word acquires new content from its environment. It means less because the context limits and narrows its potential word meaning. Okay, so he is thinking that it means more because the context adds something to the sense of the word, which is right. But at the same time, it means less because, you know, the word has different senses. And of course, the context specifies, narrows down these possibilities into one. Okay, so this is what he means. But he is not right in one thing. Just think about the fact that after all, he talks about the fact that the same word without context. But a word cannot be without context, because if you utter a word, right away, some context comes up in your mind. You know, when I say the word house, you think of something. You create a context. Okay? When I say cot, you know, the word cot can have a lot of different senses, but you create some. You know, so when you hear the word cot, you can think about cut the bread, cut your hand, you know, cut into a particular speech or something like that. So something comes into your mind. So it's not without context. The word also creates context, you know. And here are some examples. The same word, get out, is used in different senses. So the first one, we should get out of here ASAP, which means that we have to leave, you know. So this is what it means. So we have to get out of here. We should get out of here ASAP. Or the second one, get out of here. I don't want to see you anymore. This is rude, you know. So this is really telling someone to leave, you know. After all, I don't want to see you. Or the last one, when you get out of here, expresses joy. So the guy says, Rick, I have received the grant, and his friend says, get out of here, which means, oh, I'm really very happy for you, or something like that. Okay, so these are three different kinds of contexts, and the words are used in three different senses in these contexts. So as you see, the context specifies the meaning, after all, it specifies the possible sense of the word in these examples. I want to show you this, one of my favorite examples. This happened in China at Fuzhou Airport when I was traveling, and I was sitting in a cafe at the airport waiting for my flight, and there were three Australian travelers drinking, speaking loud, you know, eating and so on. And the Chinese waitress goes up to them, and she's smiling, and she says, can I get you some more coffee, sir? And the Australian traveler turns around and he says, who is stopping you? And the Chinese waitress smiles and she says, you want to stop me? And the Australian, oh no, just bring me the damn coffee. You know? So as you see, what do you think about the Australian traveler when he says, who is stopping you? He was terribly rude, absolutely rude, to say something like that. You know, when the waitress is smiling and polite and asks him whether she can bring them some more coffee, and the Australian turns around and he says, who is stopping you? So that's the rudest thing that you can say in that situation. Do you think that the Chinese waitress noticed that? Do you think that she knew how rude the Australian was? Yingru, what do you think?
I don't think she realized the rudeness behind who is stopping you, because she's asked, you want to stop me. It seems that she didn't really get the meaning behind it.
Yeah, exactly. So she processed stop literally, basically. She didn't understand the rudeness behind the expression. So she processed the word compositionally, basically, one by one, and not as a whole. Who is stopping you? That's a rude thing, to say anything like that. Someone offers you help, and then you say, who is stopping you? Okay. So after all, the important thing here is that the Chinese waitress didn't get the sense. And this is where we have a problem in bilingualism, when we use a second language. Because, we have a problem with the senses. We have a general idea about the meaning of a particular word. However, we have problems with the senses. In what different senses a particular word can be used, and context doesn't have. It doesn't have in the second language. It has in the first language. Why is that so? Because, in the first language, you are a member of a speech community, and that speech community has relative norms, standards, conventions that you are familiar with. Since you live in that speech community, several things are taken for granted by you as a member of that speech community. So you do not have a problem to figure out in what sense a particular word or expression is used. Native speakers do not necessarily have that problem. However, as far as a second language learner is concerned, who hasn't gone through the actual socialization process that the native speakers had gone through, of course, that person, that language learner, will not have most of the senses of that word, has limited access to the different senses of a particular lexical item. And here comes in the major problem of second language learning. We struggle with learning the different senses of lexical items. Even if you are a very fluent speaker of a particular language, you still struggle with that. And English especially like this. Why? Because in the English language, just think about your experience. When you started to learn English, you learned 70, 80 words and you could communicate. So you just put those words together and you can kind of do things with the words. So to begin to learn English is a relatively easy thing. If you do that with Chinese or Turkish or Russian or other languages, angulative languages, you will struggle like hell, in the first period. Not with English. English is okay, because the word order is determined, and we do not have endings and suffixes in English. So basically, we put words together and we can speak. And, we relatively easily can get to an intermediate level in English. You can even get to a pre-advanced level in English without any difficulty. The real difficulty is to get to a real advanced level. Why? Because of the fact that these short Anglo-Saxon words, cut, put, make, take, and so on, they have a lot of different senses. And it's very difficult, almost impossible, to be familiar yourself with all of them that you would need to reach a native-like competence in the English language. In other languages, when you get to a pre-advanced level, you are there. You need a little bit more effort, and then you are okay because you have already learned the basic morphological structures and endings and suffixes and everything like that. But in English, we have this kind of problem that those very short, unmotivated words, 3-letter words, have a lot of different senses. And it's almost impossible to kind of learn all the senses of get, or get along with, or put up with, and so on. So it's a struggle, of course. All right, so basically, there is, let me explain the relationship between sense and word. It is looser than the connection between word meaning and word. Sense, this is uncoded and it is context sensitive. And it changes synchronically because it is shaped by the actual thought, it is shaped by the actual context. Word meaning changes diachronically. It takes a long time for a word meaning to change. Just think about words like cool. You know, nowadays nobody thinks about temperature when you hear the word cool, you know, because it gained a new salient meaning. Or the word gay, you know, which in the last 2 or 3 decades also gained an entire new meaning. That meaning was not there in 50 years ago or something like that. So after all, the point is that for the word meaning to change takes several decades. However, for the sense to change, it takes a context. Because if you change the context, then the sense of the word may probably change. So here is the relation that I want to kind of show you. So we have the word meaning, which is the dictionary meaning, and the sense is the contextual side, where, you know, the context decide in what sense the word meaning is used. So there is this unique symbiosis between thought and word. And they are united through meaning, which is the result of their constant interaction. And of course, we have this background knowledge that we need, these frames and context, you know, that actually specifies what we mean. And based on that, you know, we can talk about word-specific semantic properties. So here is an example. The concept surrender have different kind of words to denote. So surrender serves to activate the concept directly without any kind of modular effect. However, the synonym chicken out has already a conceptual load that is added to that. So I think you feel the difference between surrender and chicken out. Chicken out has a negative connotation. This sense, of course, you know, the word meaning is very similar to surrender, but at the same time, you know, that is surrender in a cowardly manner. So there is something that is added to that, you know, but the important thing is that this something, this conceptual load is always there. So the context cannot cancel that. No way for the context. You cannot give me a sentence where actually the connotation, this kind of negative connotation, can be canceled. You cannot cancel it. It's always there. The same thing, you know, in an expression like die. Die is a relatively neutral kind of expression. However, if you say pass away, it has some kind of emotive coloring. So there is a difference between die and pass away, you know, and the difference is in emotive coloring. While die is something, you know, that is usually quite neutral, pass away is more emotional. There is more emotional coloring there, you know. So after all, this is very important as far as word meaning is concerned. We have already mentioned it, discussed several times, that actually it was even in our midterm that we emphasize that concepts are not learned in L1, they grow. So what it means, just as a reminder, it means that when you go through socialization, there are more and more aspects, more and more pieces of information added to that particular concept based on your experience. And the word actually gains new aspects through socialization. So that's a very normal process that we experience most of the time. The real thing is there that, if we have a particular word in an utterance, in a particular context, then what we emphasized was that after all, we have one sense of that word in that sentence. But at the same time, there is a conceptual domain behind the word, and that conceptual domain is everything. That is the most important thing for us, when we learn a language, because we relatively easily can acquire the literal meaning of a word because we can find an equivalent in our language most of the time for that. But we do not necessarily find an equivalency when we actually look at the conceptual domain. There is one thing that I want to mention to you is in linguistics, as I said earlier, there was this kind of idea that basically we have linguistic structures. So what we have to do when we learn a language, we have to require the grammatical structures and then require the vocabulary and put the vocabulary into that. But Ross in 1992 basically said something very important about this approach. It is formulated in a linguistic way, but I'm going to try to explain that to you. So he suggested that widely accepted views of componentiality of utterance meaning should be rejected because we are not combining fixed meaning values under a single syntactic structure, but are combining varying values in a syntax affecting way. So basically, Ross said something that I just mentioned like 20 minutes ago. If I want to translate this linguistic language, I would say that what Ross says is it's not the syntax, it's not the linguistic structures, but it's the words that require linguistic structures. So it's not the linguistic structures that require fill-ins by words, but it is the words that require particular linguistic structures, which is true because if you think about the conceptualizer and the formulator that we just discussed, then it is absolutely true. Let's just play with something. If we look at this sentence on the screen, colorless ideas are floating on the table. Colorless ideas are floating on the table. Do you understand this sentence? Brenda, what do you think about this sentence? Is it correct? Is it something that you understand, or you would never say anything like that?
I don't think I would say something like that.
Why? Bad grammar. Is there anything wrong with the grammar?
I don't think so. I just don't feel like I would say colorless ideas. Like I guess like they're saying like random ideas. Is that what they're trying to say?
Mm-hmm. So you have a problem with words. You do not have a problem with the structure at all. So there is no problem with the structure here. There is a problem with the words, how the words are related to each other, because their relationship doesn't make any sense. So the collocations do not make sense. You cannot say colorless ideas. Ideas are floating on the table. You can say ideas are floating, but not necessarily on the table. you know. So the point is that the problem is not grammar at all, not structure, but words, you know. Or look at the next one. What do you say about this?
I wouldn't say that either.
Caitlin, you are smiling. Why? What the hell is this?
Because I'm going to be honest, I have no idea what that means.
Yeah, but is this an English sentence?
Lobotomies, is that doctor talk? I might be completely wrong.
Yeah, but tell me one thing. Do you think that this is an English sentence or not?
I mean, it looks like it had, no, may have
Perfluenced. Well, you can pronounce it perfluenced.
the mart of the
Livenous, you know?
Livenous.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like there's a verb, subject.
Yeah. Very good, very good, very good, very good. So you are on the right track. Well, again, what is the problem? As you see, because, you know, this could be a fantastic English sentence. We have a definite article. We have an adjective before a plural noun. We have a verbal expression, may have perfluence. Everything is there for a past tense form of may and perfect participle, you know. And then there is an object there, you know, with a possessive marker of, you know. So what is the problem? Grammatically, there is nothing. But this is incorrect. This is not an English sentence because of the words. The words, they do not exist in the language. And Caitlin was right when her first guess was it is some like a kind of medical something, because it looks like something, but still it doesn't make sense. So the point is that it's the words, not the structure. You can have the right structure, no problem. But if the words are incorrect, everything is gone, you know? Then the whole thing doesn't make sense. Because the other way around, if you have the right words, but not in the right order, you still can make sense of something because you recognize the words. So you start to kind of put them together, you try several different structures and you come to some kind of a solution, but not in this case. In this case, you cannot do anything. As you have the structure is right, but the lexical items are wrong. So the whole thing doesn't make any sense after all. Okay, so the real thing is that we have a problem with these collocation. This is where we struggle with the second language. We don't know the collocations. Even if we know independent words, we don't know how they collocate, you know? This is the most important thing. And that's the reason why I speak about the fact the preferred ways of saying things and preferred ways of organizing thoughts. I talk about this all the time and I write about this all the time, because this is where we have a problem in the second language. Okay, you can learn all the words, all the constructions, everything, collocations, how to collocate those words, because those collocations that we have in a target language, like you are a speaker of Mandarin, or you are a speaker of English, or you are a speaker of German or whatever, because you know those conventions, those norms, those standards based on which you put together words. You don't think about that this is a heavy luggage and not difficult luggage or hard luggage or whatever. You don't think about that. It's natural. But as a second language learner, you have a problem with that. Or, you know, when you study Spanish and you say comida and almuerzo, you know, so what is the difference? Of course, you know, you may struggle with that which is the divider. The comida is more than just almuerzo, things like this. So you have to kind of be able to make connections between words, you know, the relationship between words, which you pick up through socialization in your native tongue. But you cannot do that in the second language, or it's very difficult to do that in the second language, because you do not have that experience with the second language as you have had with your first language. And, this is where you struggle with the collocations, So in English, we say he never stopped talking about his father, and he stopped to talk with me about his father. These are two different things. How these things are collocated with each other. Or, when you have the hard, difficult, heavy, so which is, you cannot say heavy question, you can say difficult question, or hard life, but you have to say heavy box. So these collocations are the ones, that make your life difficult as far as a second language is concerned, So this is where we have to be quite careful, and this is where it's difficult to learn that, because even in the classroom situation, you can teach a lot of collocations, which native speakers use, but still, at a higher level, again, going back to achieving an advanced level in English, requires you to collocate. I am writing a paper now on collocations in a second language, and I examined collocations in intercultural interactions, and it's very interesting to see what these collocations actually show you. And these collocations show you that even if you are an advanced speaker, the collocations actually tell the others that you are not a native speaker, and it is not necessarily just the pronunciation. Of course, the pronunciation right away shows that you are not a native speaker. But if they do not hear your speaking, your speech, but they read what you produce, the real problem is how you collocate words in that particular language. The better you get, so the more you improve in finding the right collocation, the more you get to a very advanced level or get close to a native speaker, So this is where I think the actual difficulty is as far as language learning is concerned. The other thing is how to map these words and expressions to each other. And this is a Japanese example I sometimes use, because, in English, we have several different words that we use to express speaking. So speak, tell, talk, say, and so on. So we have at least 4 in English: speak, tell, talk, say. However, in Japanese, they have only 2, iu and hanasu. And, the difference between them is entirely different. So iu is used for reported speech and speech acts not associated with recipient. So something like say, and hanasu requires a recipient of the speech act and is used primarily to describe the speech interaction between 2 or more participants. This is a very logical kind of separation in Japanese. But when they have to use these verbs, they struggle because they don't know which of them to choose, and they usually have a problem with speak, tell, and talk, So after all, these are the 2 issues that bilinguals struggle with, as we say, the collocations, and the other thing is mapping, less or more words on the concepts, that we have in both languages. Okay, so these are the 2 things, where we have a lot of problems. And this is where I always say to my students that if you are a language teacher, your focus should be vocabulary. Words, 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 words. It's not grammar. Grammar is secondary. Grammar can be picked up. Grammar comes even with the words, when you use the words in the right way, So after all, it's the vocabulary that you have to focus on, and the grammar is absolutely secondary. Okay, do you have any questions? Yeah, Ying.
Yes, actually, I think I have a question that is on the 4th slide. When we talk about the relations between thought and the words, I think they do exist a phenomenon that is tip of tongue. That is, we do have the preverbal ideas, but we are struggling finding out exact words to express these ideas.
You mean
So,
tip of the tongue, tip of the tongue.
yes, tip of the tongue.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
So
that's
how could you explain that?
Yeah, you're right. You know, that's a typical kind of phenomenon that you experience no matter what. You experience that in the first language as well, because even in the first language, you know, you can struggle sometimes to find the right word in particular lifelike situations. And, you know, there is something on the tip of the tongue and you don't know how to call that. And as far as the second language, that it happens many times. It happens many times, you know, but the reason is two different things. Because in the first language, the cause of tip of the tongue is the abundance of options. So you have a lot of options and you don't know which is the best option. In the second language, you do not have these options, you know, so you are struggling to remember at least one expression that would be appropriate in that particular situation. Okay, so the reason is different, of course. Any other comments or questions?
Hi, Professor.
Yes.
I have a question. So contacts in language one are not learned, rather they grow. So how about contacts from subjects? So from math, from history, or from different subjects. So here contacts means cultural specific contacts, concepts.
You mean concepts, yes?
Concept, yeah.
So
So
you concepts in different kind of subject area. That's what you mean.
So I mean, concepts here means means cultural specific concepts. Or you know, I think I feel probably my view is wrong. So concepts from different subjects, from, for example, from math, I think they learned that, right? They learned that concepts.
In the first language, of course they do, but those are subject areas. So, you know, when you study law, for example, you are a native speaker of Chinese and you study law, you know, you have to learn the specific concepts that are connected with that subject area. The same thing in English, you know, if you want to be a lawyer or something and you go to the university, there is a specific language of that kind of area where there are concepts that are not necessarily used in everyday life. So you have to learn those concepts. Yes. But, you know, what I talked about when I said that concepts are usually grow and not learned, I meant everyday life. Because, you know, if you study history or biology or chemistry or philosophy, of course, each of these areas has their own conceptual repertoire that you have to be able to use properly. Otherwise, you cannot speak about the subject matter. Yes, so you have to learn those concepts, absolutely. So it doesn't matter what language we talk about, you know, when you refer to particular kind of subject areas, those subject areas have concepts, they have notions that people are not familiarized with through socialization. You cannot get to know concepts that are connected with law or education or math or science or other subject areas. You cannot acquire those concepts through socialization. Through socialization, you can acquire everyday life concepts. You know, that's what I meant. As far as specific content areas are concerned, there you, of course, you must learn the concepts, because how could you know, the concepts of law through socialization in your first language? No, you have to learn those. But as far as the everyday life concepts are concerned, that you can pick up through socialization, all right. But the real issue is that if we study, like, for example, history, in a particular language, or philosophy in a particular language, then and then you have to talk about those things in another language. The good thing is that you already learned the concept through one of the languages. So then it is relatively possible to kind of learn the labels of those concepts in the other language. And of course, the concepts are already there. And you can learn new labels. Like, for example, you are an English speaker and you go to Germany and you study at a German university where you have to take a course in philosophy. You take the course in philosophy in German. So what you do, you develop the concepts for that philosophy class in German. But those concepts, if you want to talk about philosophy, exist in English or Russian or Turkish or whatever the other languages is. So if you want to talk about those philosophical issues, you already know, you already have the concepts. So what you have to do, for example, in Turkish, you have to learn the new terms, the terms in Turkish, okay? Because the concepts are already there. So it's relatively easier to kind of do this work if we talk about a particular subject area, because the language of physics, the language of biology, the language of law, and so on, are different language by language, but the concepts are relatively similar, So that's why, for example, when we went to the United States, my son spoke some English, but his English was not necessarily very good. However, he was one of the best mathematicians in the class because he did very well in his native tongue in maths. And basically, he had to do the same thing. He had to work with the same notions. So he knew everything much better than the American kids in the class, because he was familiar with the notions, the mathematical notions. And the only thing he had to do is to learn the new labels, to talk about those issues. So there was no problem at all, So after all, yeah, you are right that absolutely in content areas, we have to learn concepts. Any more questions? If there are no more questions, we still have some time. So I have some of the questions. So we do not have that much time. So let me look at number 2, because that's interesting. So I talked about conceptual load. I talked about conceptual load that is attached to particular words. So let's just look at some examples. Like, for example, Halloween. Yesterday you had Halloween. So when you hear this word, what kind of conceptual load comes to your mind about that? Halloween. Elizabeth, you are a native speaker of English. You know very well what Halloween is.
So you just want me to describe what the holiday is?
No, it was just what comes to your mind when you hear Halloween.
I think of like how kids celebrate Halloween, and I think of my memories from celebrating Halloween, like dressing up in costumes and the candy and all that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. But that conceptual load is very American, because I suppose that Han, for example, didn't have Halloween in Vietnam. I don't know. So tell me. No.
No, Professor, we don't have.
You didn't have. There is no equivalency in Vietnam. So of
yes,
course,
we borrow the word as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, many countries do that because Halloween is a typical American holiday. But in some countries, they started to celebrate this Halloween, and they do exactly what the Americans do. Or Valentine's Day, for example. Valentine's Day is a better example. because that's also an American holiday, which is all over the world right now. I'm sure that in China you have Valentine's Day, and you have Valentine's Day, you know, in Sri Lanka, and you have Valentine's Day in Germany or wherever you are, you know. So after all, the interesting thing here is that you take not only the word, but the concept as well. So you create the concept in your culture, which doesn't exist, but you recreate that there. The same thing, you know, the other day, I was listening to some Hungarian broadcast talk, you know, and they say Black Friday. Black Friday, this is an American phrase, Black Friday. There is no Black Friday in Hungarian culture or whatever. So they don't even try to translate the expression. You know, what they do is to take over the expression with the concept, you know, so with the concept. And right now, you know, poor Hungarians have to learn what this concept is, because, you know, all the companies, they create this kind of havoc that is here in America, you know, with Black Friday. Earlier, the Black Friday was just one day, and right now there are like 5 Black Fridays before Christmas, you know. So the point is that definitely this happens very, very often, that there is something, you know, that you have in one culture, and then what you try to do is basically not to find an equivalent, because there is no equivalent label or word in your language, but you borrow the word with the concept. That's the easiest thing to do, okay? Borrow the word with the concept and period, you know. So and that's an easy thing. So there is no difficulty at all, you know. Or, for example, pumpkin. Pumpkin. Caitlin, when you hear the word pumpkin, is it something positive that comes to your mind, or negative, or neutral, or what?
I feel like I just immediately thought of somebody calling me a pumpkin, like in a positive manner.
Yeah. So when somebody calls you pumpkin, it's very important. It is positive. But in other cultures, like again, my own culture, Hungarian, this means that you are stupid. So like as a pumpkin. So it's very, very negative if somebody calls you Turk. In Hungarian, the equivalent word is Turk, you know, and that means absolutely stupid. So you don't want to be called a pumpkin, you know, because again, my point is that that's very, very cultural. So in particular cultures, there is a conceptual load attached to the word, which might be positive, like it's the case of pumpkin, you know. American fathers tell their daughters or sons, okay, come on, pumpkin, let's have some ice cream or something like that. It's very, very common. But in other cultures, it's absolutely negative. If you take the word and then you think that the same positive connotation is attached to that. That's a problem, you know, in several, or for example, in Slavic languages like Czech, Russian, Slovakian, and so on, tikva, all of them mean the same, like in Hungarian, very negative. It's very negative when you talk about pumpkin, you know. You don't want to be called like that, because, you know, that's really terrible. How about Chinese? What is the equivalent of pumpkin, and is it negative, positive, or in between? Huh? Chinese.
I think in Chinese.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah.
I think Chinese in Chinese, pumpkin is kind of neutral meanings, because maybe we refer it to as kind of food. We can make it into our porridge or something like that.
Okay.
It's have no relationship with our with culture or with, you know, some costumes. There's no kind of relationship between that.
How about the Dominican Republic, Brenda?
Pumpkin in the Dominican Republic is like is usually used for food. Like we don't carve pumpkins in DR, and they're not big either. Like pumpkins are like smaller, so it's like way different when I think about pumpkin in DR.
But do you use that the way as Americans use it, like, you know, addressing someone in a positive way, as Caitlin said, that pumpkin, when people call someone pumpkin, it's positive. You do not do that.
Yeah, and no, I don't refer to no one as pumpkin. Like I've had people refer it to me, and I don't take offense because I know what it means. But I just, I don't think I've ever done it, and I don't think I will either.
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, we have to be careful with these things because, you know, when we learn a language, occasionally we think that the conceptual load that is attached to particular words in our first language exists in the other language as well, which is not necessarily the case. So even if there is a transfer of the concept into the other culture, like as I mentioned in Hungarian, the Black Friday thing. But in American English, the Black Friday is usually quite positive, you know, because you can make a lot of savings when you kind of go to do some shopping at Black Friday. As I noticed when I heard that, you know, in Hungarian, it was used in quite a negative sense. It was just a lot of people pushing around and so on. So after all, even if you take over the concept, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that you take over the emotional, positive or negative emotional connotation that is attached to that particular concept in the target language. All right, guys, so I think we have to have a break. So right now it's 10 minutes to 6. So please come back at 6 o'clock. And after that, we're going to continue with Hans' presentation. So thank you and see you in 10 minutes.